In this video, I'll be replacing the original radio head unit in this car with a 9-inch touchscreen unit that features Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and even comes with a backup camera. Check out the description below for a link to the one that I purchased for this third generation Kia Optima. The tools you need for this install are the included pry tool and Phillips screwdriver, although I would recommend using a better screwdriver or drill if you have one. Also, if you plan on installing the backup camera, you will need some electrical tape, a couple of electrical connectors that may vary depending on the wires that you're tapping into, a wire stripper and crimp tool, and a drill and some drill bits. First, let's get started with the unboxing. Opening up the box, we're met with a very limited instruction manual. It has a few specs in it, but not really a whole lot of useful information on how to actually install the unit. There's also a plethora of connectors, 2 cameras, a mic, a plastic pry tool, a tiny Phillips screwdriver, and a desiccant pack. Now for the grand reveal, the unit itself, complete with a custom mounting bracket for my specific model. As you can see, the connectors on the back are not the same as the ones in the original radio head unit, but thankfully all the necessary adapters are included. Showing all of the included adapters, at the bottom we have 2 USB port extenders. Each connects to a separate plug on the back of the unit. But if you use the 4-pin connector on the main CanBus harness, it supplies power to the built-in USB port on the car for charging, but not a data connection, which this has wireless CarPlay, so that's not really an issue for me. That being said, I'm not going to bother installing either of these USB extenders. The next harness is also optional with a handful of RCA connectors for specific applications. There's composite video out, right and left aux in if you want a hardwired input, 2 composite video in with input 2 if you want to install the front-facing camera. There's also right and left audio out, subwoofer out, and amp control if you use an external amplifier. Finally, there's a mic jack if you want to use the included lapel style mic. Unfortunately, the built-in car overhead mic doesn't connect to this unit, and while there is a built-in mic on the face of the radio, it picks up a lot of road noise. So if you plan on using this for phone calls, you may want to opt for that external mic. Next, we have 2 cameras. For this install, I'm just going to be using one as a backup camera and will be attaching it using this composite video in connector. It also has these short wires attached that are the Wi-Fi antennas. So even if you don't install a backup camera, you still should attach this connector to the port on the back of the unit. This black box is for the GPS antenna for the built-in Android system. If you're going to be using CarPlay or Android Auto, this is also optional since those options use the built-in GPS module in your phone. This antenna has adhesive on one side for easy mounting. Moving on to the CanBus unit, this is what allows the car to interface with the new radio. Mine came pre-programmed for my model to allow for steering wheel controls, to control radio functions, and even dims the screen when the headlights are turned on. There's also 2 additional radio antenna adapters that weren't needed for my install, as well as a basic non-CanBus harness. Now to prep the unit before installing. I'm going to be using the wiring harness that supports the CanBus module. I do want to point out that there are a few loose wires on the back of this, one of which can be connected to the e-brake switch that disables certain features for safety in the main Android operating system. Connect the small black connector to the left side of the radio. Now locate the small 4-pin connector on the harness and plug it into the corresponding port on the radio, and also the 8-pin connector and plug it into its corresponding port. Now take the CanBus module and plug it and the corresponding connectors into each side of it. Next wiring harness is the Wi-Fi antenna and backup camera plug. It goes on the bottom right of this unit, and then we have the optional GPS antenna, followed by the optional multi-plug harness. Once you get the unit in the car, the AM/FM antenna will plug into this port on the far right. If you aren't installing the backup camera, you're ready to put it in the car. However, for the backup camera, there is a little more prep that has to be done first. So the backup camera includes a fairly long composite video cable with an accessory wire. We'll be powering the camera from the reverse lights and using this accessory wire to tell the radio unit when to switch to the camera input. The camera includes both composite and power plugs, and even includes some small screws for mounting the camera module to the vehicle. The power supply has 12-volt hot and ground, which the camera can actually get its ground through the composite cable, so the 12-volt hot is all it's required for power. The control wire on the radio harness to switch to the reverse camera input is this pink wire that's easiest to splice into at this unused white connector. The easiest way to splice in is with a red easy connector to slip over and push down with the accessory wire tied in. Since I only have blue on hand for larger gauge wire, I'll have to cut it, strip back the insulation from each side, crimp a butt connector into one side, then twist one end of the accessory wire together with the other end of the pink wire and crimp those together. That wire that we just tied into is the same pink wire coming off of the third wire in the main connector. It's just a whole lot easier to tie in at that unused connector. The last thing before moving to the car is to attach the composite cable going to the camera with a reverse camera input and taping them together for security. Before installing a new radio, we have to get the old one out. Let's get started by removing the trim. Use the included plastic pry tool to get under the trim at the top, then use your fingers to pull it off the remaining clips all the way around. Now, using a Phillips screwdriver, remove the 7 screws from around the HVAC controls and radio. You'll also have to remove the top screw from the right side of the gauge cluster. Now remove the screw from the bottom right of the driver's side knee panel, and while prying the top of it back, remove 2 more screws from behind the knee panel. Now that the screws are removed, remove the HVAC panel and disconnect this yellow wire to be able to move it out of the way. Before you can remove the radio trim, there are 2 additional screws hidden behind the HVAC panel. After removing those, you can remove the radio trim by prying back the gauge cluster trim slightly to slide the radio trim out from behind it. The front section of the vent is also attached to the trim, so take your time and don't force anything. Before discarding the radio trim, separate the vent from it by removing these 3 Phillips screws, then pry back the tab on the remaining corner to release it. Now the old radio can be removed by taking out the 4 screws, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. Gently pull the head unit out and disconnect the AM/FM antenna and Sirius XM antenna if equipped, and the 2 large connectors. Now grab the pre-prepped new radio and attach the vent to it using the 3 Phillips screws. I am choosing to install the GPS antenna, and there's a small metal bracket that used to support the back of the old radio unit that you can stick it to. I've had fairly good reception with it there. Then tuck the extra wire out of the way. The 2 main connectors for the old unit will easily plug into the double connector on the new wiring harness. And since I am going to be installing a backup camera, I'm going to drop the composite cable through to the driver's side floorboard for routing to the trunk after the radio is installed. And unless you're adding the external mic or attaching an amp or subwoofer, the last thing you'll need to connect is the radio antenna. Now, to get the new unit mounted, first get the vent on the right started, then gently tuck the tabs on the left behind the driver's side vent. Now slide it up and onto the alignment pin on the top right corner and secure it in place with 4 screws. Before reinstalling everything else, it's a good idea to go ahead and turn the key to the accessory position to test it out. The first time the unit gets power, or anytime the car isn't used for several days, it will take 15 to 20 seconds for the Android system to boot up. After verifying that everything is working, it's time to reinstall the HVAC controls by reconnecting the yellow wire bundle, tucking the left edge behind the driver's side knee panel, and pressing it back onto the retaining clips. Then reinstall the 4 screws holding the HVAC controls, followed by the screws at the top and bottom of the driver's vent. Push the knee panel back into its clip at the top and reinstall the screw at the bottom. Finally, press the outer trim back into its retaining clips around the border. And that's it for the radio install. If you are choosing to install the reverse camera, route the cable around to the trunk however works best for you. I chose to run it along the knee panel, then behind the kick panel and parallel to the wire bundle under the front and rear sill plates through to the trunk. It may be helpful here to use a few zip ties when routing the wire, then reinstall all the trim pieces to hide the wire. To get the wire behind the trunk, I did have to pull a couple of trim clips and take out a screw or 2, then use a spare wire as a fish tape to get it to the top of the trunk liner and route it over to the wire bundle going up the driver's side hinge arm. Before routing the wire all the way up, remove the trunk lid liner by taking out the 10 plastic retainer clips and the 2 Phillips screws holding the trunk handle. With that out of the way, the wire can easily be added to the clips that hold the trunk release cable in place. Now for how to power the reverse camera. Since we already have a 12-volt supply wired to the reverse lights, it's easy just to tap into that wire as a power source. First, disconnect the plug from the reverse light, then peel back some of the electrical tape. You'll need to tap into this blue wire on the end for 12-volt hot. So either using an easy connector or using a butt connector that I am here, cut the wire and strip back each end. Crimp the orange accessory wire from the composite cable with one wire and the red wire going to the reverse camera power plug with the other side. It's not necessary to, since the camera will be grounded through the composite cable, but you can crimp the black wire with this black wire as well if you want to for an extra ground. Then bundle them together with electrical tape for security. I'm going to be attaching my reverse camera to the blank plate in the center of the trunk above the tag, so it's time to remove it by using a screwdriver or pry tool to release the clips. Then drill a hole big enough for the wire to fit through. It needs to be close enough to the middle so that it's inside the retaining clips, but also needs to have a slit that goes all the way to the edge of the plate for the wire to slip into. Now slide the camera wire in and get the mounting screws ready. At first I tried putting the screws on the outside holes, but as you can see, it prevented the plate from clipping into place. So I had to remove the camera from the bracket, secure it from the middle of the bracket, then reattach the camera to the bracket. Here's the completed camera mounting plate for the Optima. Back on the trunk, route the camera wires through the center hole and press the plate into place, adjusting the angle of the camera to point slightly down. Route the camera wires however you want to over to the left side to plug it in. Make sure the reverse light is plugged back in first, then connect the composite cable, wrapping it in electrical tape for security, then the power cable, also wrapping it in electrical tape to keep it from coming loose. Now, even though this will be covered up, I still like to clean up the wiring with a couple of zip ties before reinstalling the trunk liner. These trunk liner clips come out with a plastic Phillips head screw in the center, but to reinstall them, just push the clip in and push the center in with your finger. Finally, secure the trunk handle with the 2 Phillips screws. If you chose to install the rear camera like me and not the front camera, and you get this message when you switch the car out of reverse, then go into the main Android settings, under Car Settings, External Video Signal, and change it to AUX to disable the front camera from automatically showing for 10 seconds after the reverse camera shuts off. My biggest complaints are that sometimes it takes up to 10 seconds for it to connect to my phone and start CarPlay. I don't have an Android phone, so I haven't tested Android Auto. Next, if you use polarized sunglasses, you may need to get a pair of non-polarized ones. The polarizing filter in this LCD is oriented so that my polarized sunglasses make it almost impossible to see without turning my head to the side. Lastly, like I mentioned earlier, this unit doesn't have a way to use the built-in overhead mic for phone calls. Overall, I'm very impressed with this unit. The backup camera is clear and bright, even at night, and it even lowers the volume of whatever is playing when the backup camera is activated. The steering wheel controls work just like you'd expect, and the display brightness changes automatically when the headlights are turned on or off. I would definitely recommend upgrading to a radio like this if you still have the basic stock radio. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments section below, and as always, click the like button if you found this video helpful, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already.